Good afternoon to everyone. While Professor Hollis joins us, I have been asked to, since Dr. Shaukat is not here, I will be assisting in getting us all together, and I'm very happy to see the set of our panelists. I have known each one of our panelists, or almost each one of our panelists, for a very long time, and it's a pleasure to be chairing this session. I thank Sachin for inviting me to RIS for this session and for the program. And I give full marks to James for nudging me and making sure I do so. He's a very old colleague and a friend. I was very happy to hear Professor Pogue. And I don't know whether he would remember, but I first happened to meet him when RIS and the National Commission for Enterprises for the Unorganized Sector had a common chairman, which was Professor Arjun Sen Gupta. And at that time, this was way early. I'm not able to put a date or a year to it, but it was very interesting to hear Professor Pogue's ideas. And at that time, the Health Impact Fund and how the different agencies should actually get together to create a fund which would spur innovation was something very new. Later on, when I joined the WHO, I remember this was one of my first tasks on innovation and intellectual property when in 2011, this was one of the projects which was submitted under the CEWG, the Consultative Expert Working Group. And this was 2011. And I think out of all the proposals that came in the WHO, there were over 108 proposals, if I'm not wrong. There were over 108, I think. And this was one of the most exciting proposals because it was looking at the impact rather than what needs to go into the research and innovation. But having said that, WHO has moved on because in 2008 we had this WHA 6121 resolution on innovation and intellectual property, which led to the CEWG, where Professor Pogue's proposal was discussed. We went in for a while on the demonstration projects, where in India the Translational Health Science and Technology Institute, THISTI, Gaurav's project got selected. And that is still being in progress, work in progress. And we were talking of apps in the morning. That is a point-of-care diagnostic test with an app-based approach, and that is very close to fruition, as I understand. But having said that, after that, there was not much discussion on these projects. And in the WHO, we actually moved on to access to medicines and vaccines. So that was the next resolution. But having said that, last year in the regional committee in the Southeast Asia region, I work in the Southeast Asia region office. As you know, there are 6 regions in WHO. There is a Delhi declaration which said that rather than looking at medicines and vaccines, we need to look at medical products. So they were looking at medicines, vaccines, devices, and diagnostics. And so much of the discussion this morning has also been on some of these devices and going beyond just medicines. Having said that, I would just like to say a few points, and since I will not take the microphone after that, I thought I would like to say that we need to look at, in terms of WHO, when we are approaching research and innovation, we are looking at it beyond just access to medicines and medical products, because research is an important component in all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the interesting point is that while health is given under the Goal 3 and has a number of targets and aspirations, a number of other sustainable development goals are also important, and health plays a very big role in it. So for example, when you look at poverty or environment, air pollution, there are many aspects where the health aspect has to be kept in mind, and research and innovation, when we look at health-related research and innovation, these are some of the points that we do need to keep in mind, and there is a lot of work that has progressed in this direction. Another point is that since the 2011 discussions when we had in WHO, WHO and internationally also, there have been number of engagements on partnerships. So we traditionally had the DNDi, the Drug for Neglected Disease Initiative, that has done a lot of work on neglected tropical diseases. And you heard about, leishmaniasis and many of the good work that was done. But more importantly, these partnerships have come up even, for example, the CEPI partnership on vaccines. So a lot of work and is now under progress. So there are, compared to the earlier times when we did not have so much engagement on research on and innovation, this is something that has become a matter of concern, and everybody is focused on it. And in fact, one of the CEPI's discussion, which I happened to attend, which is on the vaccine partnership initiative, they were looking at 11 different diseases, and they had put a figure of about 2.8 billion in terms of what is needed for research and innovation. And some of these discussions that are taking place are looking at long-term engagement at different levels. So we have come a long way. There are new partnerships, whether it is FIND or there, in fact, even medicines for malaria venture, these have been in operation for quite some time. So alternative methods of innovation and new ways of bringing products and onto the market is becoming very important. And to that extent, the health systems innovation, which is looking at processes and how we are actually delivering at the end, becomes extremely important. Since we are, Sachin has given me a 6-minute guillotine for time. The last point I think I would like to make is that in the as I said, I work in the Southeast Asia regional office, and we are 11 countries in the region. In this, one of the initiatives we have had is the development of a Southeast Asia regulatory network. And this is a network of drug regulators. So all the 11 drug regulators of these 11 countries, which includes 3 countries which are in ASEAN. So we have Thailand, Myanmar, and Indonesia, which are part of ASEAN. And it's very interesting, because they bring a lot of discussion which takes place in ASEAN onto the CERN network, which is in our region. In this, one important point which I thought I must bring for you is that one thing which came out very clearly is, so that's my 6 minutes off. Anyway, so one thing which has come very clearly is that regulation should come in place close to the innovation as much as possible. Because what was discussed in our regulatory network is very often in devices and diagnostics, particularly the new startups that are coming up, they develop some product, and then it doesn't meet the regulatory requirements. So it is important when we look at innovation that we bring in the regulatory information so that we are able to meet that as early as possible. And in this context, we have had some discussions with BIRAC, and we have been, BIRAC has, as you know, a great ecosystem for encouraging the startups. They're working on this, and we hope that the earlier the regulation gets on, then the product which finally rolls for the patients will already have different regulatory input at different levels and will be able to meet the requirements. So since we are running short of time, I now request our Professor Aidan to please give his remarks. Thank you. I have 6 minutes. Okay, that's what is the new guillotine. But I think we could probably extend by about 30 seconds. That's too generous.
Thanks. So I'll try to be very quick. I just did want to provide a thanks to RIS and to the state of Kerala for all their support, and Dr. J.D. Menon and Dr. Ami Banerjee. The Health Impact Fund is really about sort of trying to find the drugs that are going to be most important for people. It's really about solving an innovation problem as well as an access problem at the same time. If you think about what drug companies are really after, they're really after drugs that are going to provide lots of profits, because that's what their shareholders want. And if they get lots of health benefits as well, those drugs are stars. That's what they really want. They don't want the dogs, the ones that provide no profits and are also useless. And there are other drugs that sort of go up the profit list, sort of the lifestyle drugs, whatever, like Viagra, the orphan drugs, which are maybe not very important from a global perspective, could be very effective for what they do. They can generate quite a lot of profits now, but might not be very important in terms of health benefits. But what about in the bottom right-hand corner? Drugs that generate a lot of health benefits, potentially, but won't generate a lot of profits. So those are missing drugs, largely. And this is what the Health Impact Fund is supposed to address. That's what we're really after. And just to give you a sense of how important this is, I ask you the question, whom are clinical trials performed for? This diagram shows the number of clinical trials by disease. It's in logs. So on the left, on the vertical axis, you have the log of the number of clinical trials. The horizontal axis shows the log of the DALYs, or the disability adjusted life years, in the United States. And what you can see is a pretty close relationship, that the number of clinical trials rises proportionally with basically the health losses caused by each disease. That's not too surprising. How does this look for India? What do you think? It's just like almost random. There's pretty much no relationship between the health losses in India and the clinical trials which are being performed for drugs globally, right, across diseases. There's a little bit. I mean, it's slightly upward sloping, but it does not look like the United States. And there's a reason, right? It's because drug companies are focused on making profits, not on maximizing health benefits. And so basically, you have numerous diseases of great importance in India, like tuberculosis would be a good example, which cause a lot of harm, but there are very few clinical trials on those drugs for those diseases generally. So I guess we've kind of discussed how the Health Impact Fund would work, but the basic idea is that for a new drug, instead of selling at a monopoly price, you'd register with the Health Impact Fund, sell at a low price in participating in low-income countries, and then get reward payments over a period of time. In order to determine what the reward payments would be, the Health Impact Fund would measure the health impact fund of each drug, and then the share of health impact would determine the share of the reward pool. I'm really running along here because of time. I want to emphasize that the Health Impact Fund is just an insurance scheme. It's really not much more than that. It's just a way of basically running an insurance program, where the low price is like a copay, and then the Health Impact Fund is like the insurer, and the Health Impact Fund, of course, has to be funded by governments. What's key about it and what makes it different from normal insurance schemes, a few things. One, it's international in scope, with the same reward per unit of health impact and the same low price in all participating countries. So that's going to increase the profitability of sales in low-income countries, and that solves the problem of how do we get incentives for firms to develop drugs in low-income countries, or actually drugs that really affect poor people, I guess. Second thing is that firms are having to compete over a fixed pool of money. It's only a fixed amount of money, so you actually just want to put drugs into that system which are going to have a large health impact. You don't actually want to put in the most profitable ones where you're going to be making lots of money. Instead, you're going to put in the drugs which are going to be basically high health impact, but actually not that much profit. And that makes an endogenous reward, because the total payment for any product depends on how many products are registered. So if the payments get too high, then more products get registered. If they're too low, you get fewer products registered. We heard a little bit about determining the shares, but the core point here is that the estimates would, because you're looking at rewarding products over a course of just maybe 10 years initially, you'd have to have estimates that are based on the clinical trials performed for regulatory purposes and approval. And you'd be basically looking at that plus the volume sold, and then over time you'd have an opportunity to refine those estimates based on evidence of how the drug is actually being used, what kind of indications, what are the demographics. If you can use administrative data and tablet-based data collection schemes, that would be great. But that's not going to come immediately. It's going to take a little while to begin figuring out exactly how drugs are being used. And that would only modify the reward, essentially, per patient treated. I want to emphasize, this is not like a big, shocking, revolutionary thing to do. This is essentially what current formulary, how formulary reimbursement is done in many developed countries. It's what the Ministry of Health here in India is doing with health technology assessment, right? Which is being introduced right now. And that's why essentially you've got to figure out some way of determining how much you're going to pay for a drug. This is how you do it. There isn't another way of sort of measuring health impact. This is what it's all about. Everyone's doing the same thing. So this is what the Health Impact Fund would want to do. I also want to just emphasize why you shouldn't just pay for research directly. Actually, in some cases you should. So in a direct research scheme like a PDP, like the malaria vaccines, MMV, you essentially, you're just directly funding research. So why should you do that? Well, if you've identified an important problem and you know what the specific solution is, you need a vaccine for malaria, maybe you could just directly fund that. The Health Impact Fund, on the other hand, says, look, there are innumerable problems in healthcare. There are a lot of problems, and there are lots of solutions that are possible. Typically, a pharmaceutical company might have identified one or a few possible solutions. How do you get them to develop that and then pay for it on a reasonable basis? So that's what the Health Impact Fund is about doing for a specific set of things. Let me just finally mention that we're really focused now, and you may have heard that the Health Impact Fund proposal has been around for a while. Actually, too long. I've been working with Thomas on this for closing in on 15 years. What's new for us is that we've realized that it's possible to pilot this, and we didn't really have this proposal before, to do something like a 5-year trial of the Health Impact Fund approach, funded at a fairly modest $20 million a year. And basically, we're seeking funding for 3 to 4 products that would compete to achieve assessed health impact in lower middle income countries. They need to be totally new. I can't get into the details now, but we think that India definitely has the opportunity to be a leader in support for the Health Impact Fund, given its natural leadership position in global health, its advanced pharmaceutical industry, and recognizing that its needs are not being really adequately served at the moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Aidan. And I think the important message is to maximize the health benefits, and that's not often where the pharmaceutical companies want to go. And to that extent, the innovation here in terms of getting various stakeholders together for the Health Impact Fund is critical. And I particularly think your slide on the clinical trials was important because very often much of the research also that is happening in the country is funded by many of the agencies that don't look at the disease burden within the country as well. So thank you, Professor Aidan, and can I request Dr. Kavita to go next?
It's
you want
okay.
to speak? Yeah,
Yeah,
you're welcome.
I don't have any slides, so
thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. What I would do is maybe try to do justice to 3 organizations which I'm trying to represent today: the Department of Biotechnology, BIRAC, and National Biopharma Mission. And it's a matter of pride that both the National Biopharma Mission and BIRAC were referred to both by Professor Paul and even by our chair for the session. So when I'm speaking about DBT, it's a matter of pride that Dr. Rao is here because the classical examples of incentivizing research and development within the country comes for 2, I can give examples. So the 2 most examples which are very well known and should be considered very relevant to our Indian disease burden is the rotavirus vaccine. So over the years, a candidate isolate discovered in India by an Indian academician, developed by Indian researchers, made by an Indian biopharma company or vaccine company, and then today it's available in our immunization program. So that is the incentivization which DBT does for its indigenous research and development. The other very nice example which I can think of is the School for Biodesign, the school collaboration between All India Institute and IIT, where students or fellows are actually trying to develop products which are based out of needs for Indian patients. So that's where aims this, see the patients, and it's the way we see the products developing in collaborations with the Medical Institute and a very famous engineering college of the country, IIT Delhi, is where we see products coming out, actually being developed in India, being manufactured in India, and today even being considered by many states for implementation. And I believe even Ayushman will be looking at them very favorably for those, because they're projects for our Indian societal relevance. While DBT is continuing to do its part of share what DBT perhaps 6 years also did, is that it needed a sustained mechanism of this interface of between academia, researchers, industry and the government, ensuring that innovation, research and development continues to happen in the country. And that's when 6 years back this Section 8 company was formed as an interface. BIRAC, which is often referred to as, and Manisha also referred to, is trying to work towards devices diagnostic. But of course it has more, if you read about BIRAC and come to know, you'll realize that it works across the various stages of product development, which starts right from ideation, starts from a hypothesis, starts from a concept, helps take products through various stages of proof of concept, scale up, clinical validation, regulatory compliances, regulatory strategies, supporting them, and then even helping some companies, small startups, commercializations. And what the data I could get yesterday was that today India has about 2,766 biotech companies. And BIRAC has been considered as a very strong, nurturing ecosystem providing to all these many of these companies. BIRAC, I will just especially just give out the principles on which BIRAC works. So through its various schemes, it's got, you go to the website, you'll find various different names, BIG, SIBRI, BIPP, PACE. But the principles across which it works is, it's going to foster generation of ideas which has commercialization potential and ideas based on Indian needs, societal needs. It encourages researchers to take technology closer to markets through their startups. So there are a lot of startups which have been supported by BIRAC. What it also does is consistently prioritizes early stage funding for high risk innovative research, and especially for products which are relevant for Indian market, may not have a very assured market, but at least for the Indian population, Indian patients. And it's also encouraging smaller industries and businesses to increase their R&D capabilities. So to overall increase the innovative quotient of the country, whether it's academia, researcher, company, or a combination together, is what BIRAC looks at very favorably. While this steady state of constant funding has been happening for 6 years by BIRAC, I guess DBT also realized that there is what we call in a medical language, there's a bolus dose which is required to further increase the log curve at which this industry should grow. Maybe we are not being able to, the biotech industry has not kept with the momentum of what the globally we see today. So based on that, a mission was launched last year. This is called the National Biopharma Mission, also known as Innovate in India for Inclusiveness. Mission together with Department of Biotechnology and World Bank. They put Corpus Fund. And again, it was, yes, to support product development, but a big percentage of this fund is also being looked at to create capacity and to, to identify those needs of infrastructure, those capex intensive infrastructure which our present industry or our present small startups are not able to afford. So I'll just give you very classical examples. While we were working on this, there was they're very hardcore, basic examples, like if you're wanting to develop a pneumococcal vaccine, which our immunization program badly needs, and our Indian vaccine companies are working on those developing those vaccines, but there is no Indian lab which can do the immunogenicity testing for those vaccines in an independent manner. In fact, globally, there are just 2 WHO-approved immunogenicity labs which can do the immunogenicity. So it means still our companies can do the trials, send the serum samples outside. They don't have any way to get them tested and get them approved. The more data we search, we realize that if any biologic needs to be characterize, bioanalytical characterization, 70% of all that work happens in labs which are outside the country. So that's the sort of time lag, time delay we see, and any delay in the availability of a drug or a vaccine within the country means our countrymen are devoid of that affordable product which our Indian companies would be making. There were also a lot of other, small, they say the whole wheel has to be lubricated. So a lot of small deficiencies were found in infrastructure or in licensing or the way our companies are presently doing research and development. So this biopharma mission in the last year has been trying to address many of those facilities, many of those missing training needs. Like IP has always been a strong push has been getting for the IP registration within the countries. So we don't have RTTP trained professionals within the country. We don't have lots of technology transfer offices within the country. So all these have been highlighted as critical items or critical needs which the biopharma mission should be addressing. And it's a 5 years mission which already completed about 1 year, few months. And we're hoping to see the impact of this mission in a year or two from now. And hopefully by then we could come with more like impact rather than just what is the plan. So I think that's all I had for DBT, BIRAC, and the biopharma mission at this point. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer later.
I just want to tell you that Kavita took exactly 6 minutes. I don't know how you timed yourself.
I think we should do the good job with biopharma mission too.
2 points. Yeah, the RotaVac initiative and School for Biodesign and National Pharma Mission. These are the 3 major aspects she has covered. Interestingly, on RotaVac, there's a lot of work which is going on the Smart Surveillance project, the SSS, which is also supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the WHO headquarter level. So there's a lot of integration in terms of the work being done. And I think Dr. Renu Swarup gets full marks for her great initiatives at BIRAC, and she has also been chairing many of these RotaVac vaccine programs, and also to get the manufacturers on board. So thank you, Kavita. And now I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Chinmoy. Did I get it right? Das. She's the DA-DG NCD in the DGHS in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So over to you, please.
Can I talk from here? Yes. I don't have a presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much. I thank the organizers for giving me a chance to speak, though it's just going to be extempore. I'm totally not prepared on this. And at the outset, I'd like to mention that research and development is basically not the forte of any health program, especially the NCD program that we have. We depend on ICMR for our health research related activities and also surveillance activities for the NCD program. So, but then I can definitely mention what we look at, what we look for when we talk about R&D in the field of NCD. There are a couple of things where we need real good focus, as Dr. Paul said in the morning. It's our orientation has to be now patient-centric. We have to do away with the system-centric method of medicine or policy. We have to move towards the patient-centric policies, because that's the only way we can increase the quality of life. We can really look at some measurable impact of health indicators over time. And of course, the talk about use of technology, that also needs a lot of R&D. For program point of view, we really look at, because the health programs vis-a-vis utilization of advanced technologies, be it mobile-based, be it application-based for tablet or PC or any other HMIS, I mean, that is what we really look at. One patient management point of view, maintaining a health record, having a unique health ID for every individual so that the patient is tracked throughout, wherever the patient goes, whatever level of healthcare facility he is going for. So that is at one level. The other would be like managing the data. I mean, having this kind of R&D which would really help to understand where are the flaws in managing the data. So, of course, we need more R&D on capacity building innovations, because our country does not have one type of protocol which can be followed pan-India. The model of Kerala really cannot be replicated in Bihar and UP, we all know that. So we have to look at some way of customizing these things, like tweaking according to the socio-cultural needs, tweaking according to the environment. I mean, a lot of things, this is where I just look at R&D to help in healthcare in the country. And of course, prevention and health promotion are major aspects. Like we are still awaiting some research results related to carcinoma cervix prevention. Like we are still doing HPV trials, vaccine trials. We haven't yet introduced HPV testing, which really look at. We have a long way to go in management of certain types of cancers also. Just for a small example, like the thermocoagulation vis-a-vis cryotherapy, though WHO is doing a lot of trials, yet we are really looking forward to the results. So these are all going to impact the health strategies. I mean, even if we have some strategies in place, goals in place, like we can do mid-course corrections if we have such evidence-based research results. The patient management, like looking at the continuum of care, like the referral of patients to a health system, to a higher health system, back referral for follow-up and management, like when a patient, after he avails management or treatment at a district hospital, he goes back again to the village or his primary healthcare setup where he has to continue his medicine management till he, I mean, if he's a controlled patient. I'm talking about NCD point of view. My vision is a little tubular because I work for the NCD program right now. So these are some of the ways we look at R&D. We have to, of course, identify the best buys. Unless we have good, evidence-based reports from these researchers, we really cannot understand which are the best buys, good, replicable, scalable models in the country. So for that, we also, from the National Health Mission, we have a good practice innovation workshop every year. So where we try to identify some replicable and scalable models. So these are some of the ways we look at this. And talking about, should we incentivize this type of a model? That is, of course, I just really like to go a little beyond, a shift from this mainstream topic, like incentivizing different cadres of healthcare. Is it actually going to help? Of course, this is a research topic, of course. Are we doing justice by just incentivizing the patient to get motivated? Is it to be in cash or kind? Should we do that? That should be also part of the research topics that should come up. So I'm not talking about hardcore research in any area, but of course, linking all these will affect the health impact outcomes, because it is the national health programs which are definitely going to cater to, say, 80% of the population if we do it in the right way. So, looking at research agencies, as well as looking at medical colleges where they have students, or other universities where we have a lot of students coming up with thesis writing. That's a real good window I look at when we talk about health researches. I think, thank you all. That's all I have to say.
I thank Dr. Chinmoy for also meeting the same time for 6 minutes. More importantly, you said you were not prepared, but it didn't appear so. Because you have completed a very vast range of what is needed in terms of R&D and NCDs. And the issue that you took up in the morning when you mentioned about the prevention and promotion, that is critically important, because it was also a reference made in the morning by Dr. Paul when he said that we need infrastructure to make sure that the NCDs don't arise in the first place. There was some study I saw somewhere which said that if there is a playground within 400 meters of your residence, then people are incentivized to walk. So this is the kind of R&D which is critical and which you have also mentioned. And the fact of customizing programs, that is so critical for our country. The fact that what happens in Kerala may not happen in Bihar. I think that is something we really need to remember, because it's very difficult to translate. And the HPV trials, you talked about patient management and the best buys. So that's a huge agenda that you have actually covered. And I think the question of incentivizing the health cadres is a very difficult subject. And this is something that even in terms of human resources for health, this is a continuous discussion, even in WHO, in terms of where exactly the balance lies. So thanks a lot, Dr. Chinmoy. And can I now request Zakir to make his presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. and compliments to RIS for organizing this seminar on such an important topic. Since patient centricity has been talked about as a key issue, and that is the key issue behind the issue of access to medicine, I would just mention this one point, and then the rest of the panelists will take over in the interest of time. When we talk about innovation, in the current model of innovation is market-driven, we all know, and that is what causes a significant shift to profit-oriented diseases. And there is this huge class of orphan diseases which were mentioned by Professor Hollis, which are outside market, but for which solutions have been found in advanced markets. For example, an orphan diseases policy was adopted by US in 1983. In European Union, this was adopted in 2000. And this is one where you provide government funding for early stage research, tax incentives, and a large number of incentives are provided. However, once the incentives are provided, the drug is developed, the market decides the costing. That is the model that is universally adopted, and this model actually has enabled orphan drugs to come up even with blockbuster drugs. Now, these are not really ignored or orphaned as such by pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies are really looking at orphan drug development as a method of making, or mechanism to make profits, which is in a way good, because you are getting a large number of drugs now into the market. An example is the case of spinal muscular atrophy, a disease, SMA, which is a genetic disorder. It doesn't affect large number of patients. We have a large number of patients. We have a number of patients in India. There is a small patient group. I'd asked in India how many would be, the persons who are connected to each other, about 250 to 300, that's all. But these are very bright kids, though they are, this affects largely children, and it is progressive disease. And even last year, I think one of the topper of class 12 was an SMA affected person. Now, these very bright children progressively are affected by this disease. In US, luckily, a number of pharmaceutical entities had been working on this. And currently, Novartis developed a gene therapy, which is a one-time cure, and it's available in the US market. It's been launched in the US market. But the price tag is $2.1 million US. That is the costliest drug now available in the market. What is the Novartis argument? There is a competitor drug, which is not a one-time cure. It's Biogen Spinraza, which costs something of the order of $750,000 US, and in the first year and subsequent years about $3.5 lakh US. So that treatment is ongoing. So since this replaces the existing treatment, and since it's a one-time cure, they think that this is a price that the market can afford. It's a replacement cost. So there is a valid argument there. Now that one of few, and in US, the insurance companies have negotiated with Novartis and has come out with a price of about 4.5 lakh US for 5 years in the case of Zolgensma, the new drug. Now the question which we look at is, what about the Indian patients? If we are talking about access to drug, here is a disease condition. You have treatment available elsewhere in the world. These treatments are made available by policies of the respective government, US or Europe, supported largely by public funds. Of course, final development done by pharmaceutical companies. And pharmaceutical companies have marketed it. In those countries, in those advanced countries, there are policy mechanisms where some support is being provided. Insurers are coming and talking on behalf of the patients. But what about Indian patients? Even in the case of Biogen's Spinraza, which is much lower cost drug, which is currently the standard of care in US, till this Zolgensma was introduced, the company has not discussed about introducing the drug in India. Even if they have discussed about introducing, will our patients be able to pay that about 3 to 4 crore treatment cost? In the case of, even if we get Zolgensma, the one-time cure into the Indian market, which costs about 14 crore, how many Indian families could afford that? So this is one question which is something which we need to address at policy level, at probably national level, because each human life has value. Even if our patient number is limited, we need to find solutions and make sure that drugs and solutions that are available in one part of the world is accessible in the other parts as well. So with that, I thank the organizers again for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zakir, and thank you for bringing focus on one of the most intractable problems that we have in public health, the issue of the cost of medicines, and particularly the new biologicals that are coming up. And what he has mentioned about Novartis and the replacement, the cost of replacement of a therapy, is the same argument that was made in the Sofosbuvir case. If you look at the arguments made before the US agencies. And I think this is critical, and what you have mentioned in terms of the need for orphan diseases, and even if one person needs a drug, what is the government policy, and how should we see the value of a life? So these are some of the most difficult issues when we look at it from a policy perspective and also from a government perspective. To those of you who don't know Zakir, which I don't think there will be many, he was the person who was leading the open source drug discovery project in CSIR for many years. So he has had a lot of experience, particularly with respect to TB, and that has been very valuable. So thanks, Zakir, and now I request Sadhna to please make her presentation.
Thank you very much. And as I do not have any presentation, so I will share my thought. And as part of the ICMR, I will share my thoughts on the topic, that is improve access to medicine and evidence-based policy in health. So I am very glad that topic has little bit amended in the sense that it is improved access and evidence-based policy. We are talking about the access in last 15 years, and as with the thought and the presentation in my earlier session, that access has been improved little bit in terms of the Aushadhi Yojana, in terms of the generics, in terms of the other government schemes, but still it required something else. And when we are going to formulate the health policy, it should be the evidence-based, so that would be more objective and we are able to deliver in a more effective way. So with this background, I would like to just mention that when I come across about the background paper, that this is basically related to the non-communicable diseases, and when we are talking about the access and the improved access, and then they address this issue of the access in terms of the disease burden. So that issue is addressed in a different way when we are talking the communicable diseases as well as the non-communicable diseases. In the communicable diseases, the address of the access is term of the availability. No research has been done because it is not a profitable proposition by the industry, especially the multinational. But as well as when you're talking about the non-communicable diseases, this is the affordability, the question of the affordability and the cost, as addressed by Dr. Thomas, that what would be for the Indian patients. We have the molecule, We have the molecule, but it is not accessible to the Indian population because the cost is very exorbitant. So that we have to move to the next level, how we can improve our access by not doing going the incentives and the making some kind of the donations, but we have to improve our R&D capacity. R&D capacity has to be incentivized, and lot of the government initiative has been taken care to improve the R&D capacity. As ma'am has said that the consultative working group, we are talking about the partnerships. So that is the time then when the public sector as well as the private sector has to come together to do some kind of the collaborative research to make more effective R&D, to make our molecule or the CVD molecule or the cancer molecule or the non-communicable disease molecule in our country. So this notion that lot of the incentive, lot of the initiative has been taken by the government of India to incentivize the research and development by the collaborative research in the form of sponsored research in the company to strengthen the Indian indigenous companies, that new molecule, because as you see in the 25 years or 30 years, no new molecule has been developed, neither in the communicable disease nor in the non-communicable disease. We are basically rely on the reverse engineering or the some other kind of the advancement or the incremental inventions. So if you want to focus on the molecule has to be developed, a kind of the partnership with the public and private. And the lot of programs has been developed in the expenditure form, in the contribution form, as well as in the form of the funding. Like say for example that the program which is developed by the DBT, developed by DST under the Technology Development Board, that they provide the funding to the indigenous company in a form of the equity capital or in a form of the loan, that if they have a capacity to commercialize and develop on own indigenous R&D and to make it marketable. So that kind of this is provided by the DST, and also the domestic to import the goods from outside, and then if have the wider domestic purposes, then it's also given a loan by the Technology Development Board. The other is in the expenditure. That expenditure in R&D, and you have a deduction in the income tax. And the R&D income tax deduction 100% if it is for the commercialization purposes or it is for the development purposes, that in the, or and the other way in the contribution. If the contribution by the entity, approved entity by Government of India, and contribution in the form of the kind or some kind of the monitoring, then it is given to the any entity or the lab of the government supported lab or the government lab. And the government is a defined goal. That goal which is also coincide with the objective of the government of India and the public health concern is defined goal is mentioned, so then it can be also 150% tax deduction. So these are the incentivization by the government of India through the Ministry of Commerce and Industry and the Department of Business Promotion. So these are the things, and the rest of the things that we have to do the innovative R&D, more participation of the private entities, so that we will be strengthened to our own capacity building in the R&D. That's all.
So I can thank Sadhna. In fact, the aspect in terms of government promotion of innovation is something very critical, and she has raised the issue of tax and how 150% of tax benefit is given. In fact, I remember looking at some stage, I think it was in the National Commission, when I was looking at some data which actually showed that a lot of personnel, employees of the company are put into R&D to show the tax to get the tax benefits as well. And then that raised the very important point that you mentioned, that we are actually not getting a good molecule out. So that we need to look at the structural aspects which need to get this in place. And your issue on donations was very important, because this is the issue which is being raised with bedaquiline. And the government is very concerned that we need to have a proper strategy rather than relying on the donation model. And also the importance of affordability as part of the access conundrum. So these are some of the very important points that Sadhana has raised. And let me tell you, I have seen Sadhana grow in a number of years in ICMR, and I think it's a pleasure to meet her today, and thanks to RIS. So Dr. Suresh, you're the last on our list. And I hope Sachin is not too unhappy with the timekeeping.
Hello. Well, as the last speaker, I guess I'm battling information overload on one side and a guillotine on the other side. But since this is a meeting on non-communicable diseases, I thought I'll take a walk. Thank you very much, Professor Chaturvedi. With regard to the access to medicines, we have been talking about medicines, and I'll talk about the access part. So you have the medicines and you have the logistic system which need to actually deliver the medicines where it needs to be delivered, and that is what my lab is actually working on. I'm based out of Hyderabad, and we also run India's first master's and PhD program in health informatics, where we try to bring in new ideas into healthcare. So we have been working at several levels. My team was the first one in this country to even strap a box of medicines to drone and then fly them. And we got a call from the local assistant commissioner, and soon afterwards DGC actually banned drones. But our R&D efforts are actually continuing, and we are actually building conceptually an entire drone-based logistic system which not only takes medicines but also collects blood the reverse way for further diagnostics, and also tries to connect blood banks, which is another serious issue, and also tries to deliver vaccines and hopefully sometimes organs also. And the reason why I'm mentioning is, only if you look at healthcare as a comprehensive way, it's ever going to be economical at all. And we have found a partner with Boeing, and we are trying to work together. I also tried to package a small part of this to a BIRAC grant, not very successful. Thank you, BIRAC. But I guess that happened. Yes. At the next level, what we are also trying to do is build a last mile solution where from the health and wellness center, we are hoping to take as much what we call products, the devices, medicines to the person's home. And even there you see that the difference between medicine logistics and other logistics is the temperature control. And each one has different temperatures, vaccines 2 to 8 degrees, medicines about 17 degrees, certain medicines, and then if you're talking about blood, it's 24 degrees. So it has to be, kind of carried in different areas. Amazon can deliver books or probably anything, but when it comes to delivering medicines or healthcare, it has to be temperature control. So this is also something that we are trying to work at the ground level from the health and wellness center to a person's home. And this is something we are trying to work with the Honda motorcycle. So we have also tried to find a partner. Hopefully by November, we should have a prototype ready. Whereas the drones is kind of a very conceptual one. It will probably take another 2 years. We are actually trying to simulate a very large area of almost 10 million people, and then locate all the healthcare facilities, map the healthcare needs of the people. We are even weighing the weight and volume of each of the essential medicines, around 600 of them, so that we can actually estimate clearly what is the need, and then come out with the frequencies of flight and then the payload capacities, and then work out a model which is going to actually work. Then there are actually regulations. So regulations and R&D really don't go well together. But then that's the way it is. If regulations support R&D, then you are really not doing any original research, because regulations actually follows R&D. There's always a conflict here. The third area that we are actually working on is we are also building apps like everyone. But our apps are slightly different in the sense that it does not have text, it does not have language, because at local level, the challenges we actually find are language first. location, you can always carry a mobile phone anywhere. But the third challenge that we are actually finding is the skill levels, which is where we are trying to use artificial intelligence to make a decision and then try to deliver an intervention at the ground level. So we are not literally letting data fly, but rather come down to the point as soon as it is generated. So we are actually building in real-time artificial intelligence wherein you can start intervention as soon as the data is generated. And in most cases in primary care, it's not really artificial intelligence. It's kind of a buzzword these days. It's pretty simple rule-based logics, if-then situation where if you have something, start doing this. And this kind of skill level unfortunately doesn't exist. And when you start doing this, you also find that data is actually collected passively. You start improving the reliability, and if you want to deliver anything at an individual level, the first thing you need is individual data. Otherwise, sampling really does not work. So in fact, we have moved away from sample data to collect comprehensive data. We also did a study where we have picked up a population of 100,000, and we have been looking at the NTDs, which is very small number even compared to non-communicable diseases. But our donors said we'll go forward with the comprehensive data collection, and we actually took the photos of all the households, all 30,000 of them, but we also took photos of all the healthcare facilities, of all the village level facilities, and literally digitally recreating this entire 100 villages. And at the end of the project, the data was more valuable than the inferences. Inferences was a bit difficult to make. So this is actually the power of the data, but what we also find is at this kind of a granularity, you will be able to make decisions at individual level, at even household level, and this is what we are actually aiming to do. So our focus is on three things. One is empowering the person at the ground level. So if you're able to collect data at ground level, you'll be able to empower the person. So using icons and your mobile phones, you'll be able to do both. Language is not an issue, at least now. We are also shifting the goalposts. So when you say people have to come to healthcare facility, it usually does not happen. So we are trying to see how much healthcare can be delivered at the person's doorstep, which is probably the home. And we are trying to build as many interventions as possible that can be delivered at the person's doorstep itself, which is where we find most of the people live. So you'll probably be able to achieve 100% coverage or even universal coverage. And unless you are able to deliver healthcare at the doorstep, in our country, I'm sorry, I guess the guillotine is already rolling. So I'll take an extra 30 seconds, sorry. Yes. So, but at this rate, we will hopefully be able to increase the frequency of the treatment, which is what is actually required for treating non-communicable diseases. You will have to improve on the frequency of the treatment. I'll kind of quickly summarize on what needs to be done, which is what is the thing. We need to shift innovation at a local level. Innovation is not something that is happening in a fancy place. Innovation has to happen at local level. Small things need to be taken care of. When we talk about digitalization, the system has to be digital friendly. We are sitting in a country where the primary pack of medicines does not have a barcode. Without a barcode, it's difficult to track. Please, you need to have a barcode. The second thing is your Aadhaar card has a QR code, which is very difficult to read. Look at the Paytm QR code, it's this big. It's very difficult. These are small things that need to be done if you want to bring in digitization. Otherwise, it's going to be, these are very pointed things. And the third one is when you are talking about a health impact fund, not only you should be talking about medicines, but also the back-end logistics system also. So please have a kind of a slightly balanced view. And when you want to connect all these things, what you see is digitization turns out to be the common denominator. Whether you want data, whether you want interventions, whether you want to bring in medicines, whether you want to do anything, digitization continues to be the common denominator. And that is what tries to connect everything together. Well, thank you very much. And we are also trying to have issues with our startups around us with regard to rules and regulations and also the research part. So as part of our program, we are trying to bring in some kind of a small modules as far as medical device regulation and also the research side of it. Well, thank you very much. And
thank you. So I thank Dr. Suresh from my side and from each one of us. Actually, Suresh, I think we missed that you don't have a PowerPoint presentation to show the drone. I'm sure I speak for for everybody in the audience, because we would have liked to see something flying. I think he made some very important points on back-end logistics being important, the barcodes. This can really simplify, and in fact, barcodes are critical, particularly if we also look at what is another acronym in WHO, the SF products, the substandard and falsified products. And that will be very useful to track those and to make sure that people get quality medicines and products. And I think you also made the fact that individual data is important, and the fact that we can actually get to a person on the household rather than look at medical facilities. That's a huge jump in terms of patient care that is possible because of new technology, and this is looks to be a very exciting field. I think Kavita is giving you an invitation to come again to BIRAC. So with these words, I thank our very illustrious panel, and I invite Sachin to take the session forward, and thank you.